The cameras flickered awake, bathing the Tonight Show stage in its familiar halo of light. The audience clapped with the reflexive enthusiasm of people primed to laugh, to cheer, to play their part in the ritual of late-night television. Jimmy Fallon bounded forward, his grin polished, his voice pitched high with the warmth of a host who had mastered the art of never letting silence linger. But tonight, silence was waiting for him. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson entered to thunderous applause, the kind of ovation that rattled the rafters and seemed to affirm his place as both entertainer and cultural icon. He waved, he smiled, he hugged Fallon. On the surface, nothing seemed unusual, yet the energy between them carried an undertone, something unscripted, something alive, almost dangerous. The first minutes passed with small talk, Fallon tossing easy jokes, Johnson parrying with his trademark charm, but beneath the laughter, a weight pressed in. Fallon teased Johnson about his rumored political ambitions, expecting a chuckle, a shrug, a safe deflection. Instead, Johnson's eyes narrowed, his jaw set. "You mock ambition because you fear accountability, Jimmy," he said, the words heavy, deliberate. The laughter faltered. Nervous titters scattered through the crowd like birds startled into flight. Fallon blinked, unsure if this was part of the bit or the beginning of something far less controllable. Fallon tried to steer the ship back into calm waters. He chuckled, adjusted his tie, glanced toward the band for rescue. But Johnson leaned closer, his voice steady, his body language commanding the room like a judge presiding over a trial. "This stage," he continued, gesturing to the cameras, to the crowd, "is more than jokes. It's influence. Millions watch, millions believe. You can't keep laughing off responsibility." The audience gasped, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. What had been a talk show segment was transforming into testimony, into accusation. Fallon's practiced smile wavered, his laugh tightened into something brittle. "This is supposed to be fun," Fallon said quickly, almost pleading. "Fun without truth is distraction," Johnson shot back. His words echoed in the silence that followed. The cameras kept rolling. The producers in the control room exchanged panicked looks, hands hovering over switches, uncertain whether to cut to commercial or capture history. And history was unfolding. The Tonight Show, normally a cathedral of laughter, had turned into a courtroom. The audience, no longer clapping on cue, now resembled a jury. Some leaned forward, riveted. Others recoiled, unsure if they wanted to see their late-night escape hatch turned into a trial of morals and power. The tension thickened until it was no longer a show, it was a spectacle. Johnson's massive frame, lit by studio lights, seemed to swell with conviction. Fallon, smaller now, his smile slipping, appeared less like a host and more like a defendant caught in cross-examination. "You joke because you can't face the truth," Johnson said, the words cutting through the stage like a gavel strike. Fallon's lips parted, but no words came. The silence was deafening. The audience had become witnesses to something raw, something unplanned, something real. And in that moment, The Tonight Show was no longer just entertainment, it was Judgment Day. The applause from Johnson's entrance had faded, but the tension still hummed in the air. The cameras zoomed in closer, catching the shift in his expression, the warmth giving way to steel. Fallon leaned back in his chair, clutching his cue cards like a lifeline. He tossed out another joke, desperate to bring the mood back. "So, are we going to have to call you Mr. President someday?" he asked with a forced chuckle, expecting the family laugh, the playful denial. But Johnson didn't laugh. His shoulders tightened, his eyes fixed on Fallon with the weight of a man no longer willing to play along. "That's what you do, Jimmy. You turn real questions into punchlines. You turn accountability into entertainment." The crowd reacted with a ripple of uneasy laughter, the kind that comes when nobody knows if it's safe to laugh. Fallon swallowed hard, his grin faltering for the first time. He tried to smooth it over, shifting in his chair, his voice carrying an edge of impatience. "Hey, come on. This is the Tonight Show. We're here to have fun, lighten the mood." Johnson leaned forward, his voice deepening. "Lighten the mood while the world burns? While people ask real questions? You think this stage is a shield, Jimmy, but millions are watching. They deserve more than a dodge." A hush spread across the studio. The audience, caught between loyalty to their beloved host and awe of the towering figure across from him, froze in silence. Some shifted in their seats, Others raised their phones, sensing they were capturing a moment that would explode online before dawn. Fallon's laugh returned, but it was thin now, brittle as glass. He tapped his desk nervously, looking for the band to play him out, for anything to drown out the stillness. "Look, man, it's just jokes. Everybody knows that." "Do they?" Johnson's words rang sharp, his gaze unblinking. "Or do they start believing what you tell them when the jokes are all they hear?" The words hung like a charge in the air, heavier than the laughter that had filled the room minutes before. Fallon shifted again, his hand rubbing the back of his neck, his voice faltering. "You're making it sound like I'm the problem." Johnson didn't hesitate. "You're part of it. This industry, this stage, it lets people hide behind laughter when the truth is staring them in the face. You mock what matters most because you think it keeps you safe." The audience gasped. A woman in the second row shook her head, whispering to her neighbor, while a man in the back muttered, "This isn't a bit." The Tonight Show, polished and predictable for decades, suddenly felt volatile, alive with conflict. In the control room, producers scrambled. Someone hissed into a headset, "Do we cut? Do we roll? We're losing him." But the director's eyes were locked on the monitors. He knew. History was being made. Fallon clutched at his cue cards, now useless in his trembling hands. He forced another laugh, his trademark defense. Okay, big guy wants to give me a lecture." Johnson leaned closer, his voice lowering, but carrying more power than ever. "Not a lecture, a warning. Stop laughing at what you don't want to face." The words landed like a gavel strike. Fallon blinked rapidly, his lips parting as if to respond, but no words came. The audience didn't cheer. They didn't laugh. They only stared, transfixed, as if the walls of the studio had collapsed into a courtroom. And in that silence, it was clear. What began as a harmless joke had lit a fire that no one on that stage could control. Fallon's trademark smile twitched at the corners, struggling to stay alive under the heat of Johnson's words. The cards in his hand had turned into a shield he clutched too tightly, the paper bending against his sweaty palms. He leaned forward, voice pitched higher than usual, a nervous laugh punctuating every sentence. "Look, Dwayne, I get it. You've got your big ideas, your big causes, but this is my show. We do jokes. People tune in because they don't want a lecture. They want to laugh." The audience, usually quick to reward Fallon's self-deprecation with applause, sat frozen. Their silence was a verdict. Johnson did not blink. His presence at that desk was less guest and more prosecutor. "You hide behind." "That laugh, Jimmy," Johnson said evenly. "You use it like armor. But there comes a time when the armor becomes a cage." Fallon's eyes darted toward the band. He gave a little wave, hoping for the cue of a playful riff, something to break the mood. But the band leader sat still, uncertain, fingers hovering above the keys. No one dared interrupt. Fallon's laugh returned, sharper now, desperate. "You're really serious about this, huh? You're sitting here telling me how to run my own show?" "You're the one who brought me here," Johnson replied, leaning closer. "You invited me to speak, and what I'm telling you is the truth. Jokes can't erase responsibility. Not yours, not mine, not anyone's." Fallon's face flushed, his smile finally cracking. "Come on, man. Don't turn this into an attack. People read things about me all the time. Toxic workplace, I drink too much, I'm too this, too that. It's all just stories. But you coming here, doing this, you're humiliating me on my own stage." The words slipped out sharper than intended, his voice breaking as the veneer of control splintered. A murmur rolled through the audience. Not laughter, not applause, but the hushed murmur of witnesses who sensed the unmasking of a man who lived by applause. Johnson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Humiliation is what happens when the mask falls. You wore it long enough, Jimmy. Maybe it's time people see the man underneath." Fallon's jaw tightened, his eyes glassy under the lights. He glanced at the cameras, then at the audience, searching for support he could no longer command. The weight of the moment bore down on him, the stage transformed into a witness stand where his every flinch became evidence. He slammed the cards onto the desk, the sound echoing in the studio. "This isn't fair. I'm not on trial here." The silence that followed said otherwise. The audience, rapt and unblinking, had become a jury, and Fallon, trembling under the spotlight, was no longer host. He was defendant. Johnson's gaze softened, but only slightly. "You're not on trial, Jimmy. You're being asked to face what you've been avoiding. That's all." The studio lights seemed harsher now, unforgiving. Fallon leaned back, hands gripping the edge of his desk, his voice dropping to a whisper. I just want to make people happy." Johnson nodded slowly, his tone firm but not unkind. "Then give them honesty. That's the only happiness that lasts." The audience exhaled collectively, as if they'd been holding their breath for minutes. The tension had not broken. It had only deepened, pulling everyone in tighter. And in that moment, it was clear. Fallon was not winning back control. He was unraveling, live, before the eyes of millions. The air inside the studio was thick, the kind of silence that presses against the chest and makes breathing feel like betrayal. Fallon sat rigid at his desk, the sparkle of late-night charm drained from his face. The audience, wide-eyed, leaned forward as if history itself was whispering through the cracks in the stage. Johnson shifted his massive frame, no longer leaning toward Fallon like an aggressor, but rising taller, straighter, as though claiming the room with a new kind of authority. His voice softened, but the quiet made it sharper, more dangerous. "I grew up with nothing," he said, his gaze sweeping over the audience, bypassing Fallon completely. "I came from a family that fought for every meal, every ounce of dignity, and I learned early that words matter. That the people we watch, the people we trust with our attention, they shape us, whether they mean to or not." The audience stirred, some nodding unconsciously, others clasping their hands together as though they were sitting in a sanctuary. Fallon blinked hard, his lips pressed tight, as if holding back an instinct to cut in, but Johnson didn't give him the chance. "You sit in this chair, Jimmy," Johnson continued, gesturing toward the gleaming Tonight Show desk, "and millions of people invite you into their homes every night. That's not just entertainment, that's influence, and influence comes with responsibility. To laugh, yes. To bring joy, yes. But also, to be honest, to be accountable. Because when all you give them is distraction, you fail them." Fallon inhaled sharply, his fingers drumming against the desk, his voice breaking through like a crack in the wall. "So what? You want me to turn this into a news show? People don't want that. They've got enough pain in their lives. They don't come here for truth. They come here for escape." Johnson's eyes locked onto him, unblinking. Escape without truth is just anesthesia, and anesthesia wears off. Then what's left? Numbness, disappointment, lies. The words landed with a weight that bent the air. Fallon's shoulders sagged, his eyes darting toward the cameras as though searching for mercy from an invisible judge. Johnson lowered his voice further, each word deliberate. "When you choose to laugh at the things that deserve to be faced, you teach people that it's okay to look away. And when you look away too long, Jimmy, you wake up and wonder why the world is burning." The audience exhaled, a single sound. Collective, heavy. The room had shifted. What was once a comedy stage now felt like a pulpit, a courtroom, a battlefield all at once. Fallon shook his head, his voice barely audible. "You make it sound so heavy. I'm just one guy." Johnson's expression softened just slightly, his voice carrying something that almost resembled compassion. One guy with a stage, one guy with a voice, one guy with the power to either hide from truth or face it. "Don't tell me that's small. Don't you dare." Fallon swallowed hard, his throat tight. For once he had no comeback. The band sat frozen. The cue cards lay abandoned on the desk, and the audience waited, breathless. Johnson straightened, letting the silence settle like a gavel striking wood. "We don't get to choose whether people listen," he said finally. "We only get to choose whether we give them something worth hearing." The lights overhead glared brighter, as though the universe itself had leaned in to hear the verdict. And in that moment, Fallon was no longer the host, no longer the star. He was a man standing before the weight of truth, unable to laugh his way out. The silence in the studio was no longer ordinary. It wasn't the pause before a punchline, nor the stillness before applause. It was heavier, the sound of judgment being formed in real time. Fallon, red-eyed and tight-lipped, stared down at the desk as though the wood itself might rescue him. Across from him, Dwayne Johnson remained unflinching, his presence towering, his every word carrying the gravity of testimony. The audience had shifted. They weren't laughing now. They weren't clapping on cue. Their eyes darted between the two men like jurors deciding where truth resided. Some leaned forward, transfixed, as if every syllable mattered. Others recoiled, arms crossed, uncomfortable that their nightly escape had turned into something raw, unfiltered, and real. A woman in the front row whispered, "This isn't a bit." Her neighbor nodded, phone raised discreetly, the red recording light glowing like evidence being collected. In the back, a man muttered, "He's calling him out live." The murmurs spread like cracks in glass, small voices echoing the growing realization. This was no longer entertainment. Fallon broke the silence, his voice tight. "You think this audience came here for a lecture, Dwayne? They came to laugh. They came to forget." Johnson turned toward the crowd, ignoring Fallon. His voice resonated not just in the studio, but through the cameras, through the living rooms of millions watching. They came here to feel something real. And sometimes, real isn't easy. Sometimes, real isn't safe. But it's honest. The audience gasped, caught off guard by being addressed directly. The lens of judgment swung back onto them, and for a moment, they were no longer spectators but participants. Their applause, their silence, their every reaction was being weighed as testimony in this unplanned trial. And then it began to spread beyond the studio. In homes across America, phones buzzed as clips surfaced online within minutes. On Twitter, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Rock vs. Fallon. Tonight Show Trial. Truth on Air. Comment sections lit up with arguments. Some hailed Johnson as the rare celebrity brave enough to speak truth to a system built on distraction. Others condemned him as a grandstander, hijacking the stage to polish his own ambitions. In the control room, a producer stared at the live feed of trending hashtags, muttering under her breath, "We've lost control of the narrative." Another snapped back, "Or maybe we just made history." Back on stage, Fallon's composure wavered further. His voice cracked, desperate to pull the jury, both in the seats and at home, back to his side. "You're turning them against me. That's what this is. You want them to see me as a villain." Johnson didn't even flinch. "I don't need to turn them. They see what they see. They hear what they hear. You can't laugh your way out of it anymore." The audience erupted, not in laughter but in divided noise. Some clapped and cheered Johnson's words, others booed, unwilling to see their host cornered. The energy was electric, chaotic, like a courtroom where the jury itself couldn't agree. Fallon's shoulders slumped. For the first time in his career, he was not the master of the room. He was a man judged by the very people who once worshipped his charm, and as the audience murmured, gasped, and debated in real time, the truth settled like a verdict. This wasn't Fallon's show anymore. It belonged to the people. Fallon's face was flushed now, the boyish grin gone, replaced by the tight jaw of a man cornered. The audience's split reactions stung worse than any critic's review. For years, he had been the smiling escape hatch of American television, untouchable in his charm, untouchable in his role. But tonight, his armor had cracked, and the jury in front of him wasn't applauding. They were divided, restless. He sat forward suddenly, slamming his hand on the desk, his voice rising not in laughter but in anger. "You think you're some kind of saint, Dwayne? You think you're better than me because you stand here and preach about truth?" The audience gasped. Fallon's tone had shifted from defensive to combative, and it electrified the air. Johnson didn't flinch, but the spark had been struck. Fallon pressed on, his words coming faster now, his voice trembling with rage. "Let's talk about responsibility. You've made billions off blockbusters, off superhero roles, off brands and corporations that exploit the very people you claim to care about. You sit here talking about truth, but you've spent your whole career polishing an image. The Rock, the nice guy, the hero. But it's just another act." The crowd stirred. Some nodded, others booed. But everyone leaned in. For the first time, Fallon wasn't pleading. He was striking back. You want to accuse me of hiding behind jokes? Fallon sneered, his laugh bitter now. At least I'm not hiding behind muscles and PR teams. At least I'm not pretending to be some moral compass while cashing checks from companies that wouldn't know accountability if it hit them in the face. Johnson's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening, but he didn't interrupt. He let Fallon's words hang in the air, knowing the crowd was absorbing every syllable. Fallon jabbed a finger toward him, voice breaking with intensity. Where were you when real debates raged? When the country was on fire? When people needed leaders to stand up? You stayed quiet. You smiled for the cameras. You chose silence. And now you walk in here and act like you're the one telling truth. The audience roared, divided again but louder than before. Half cheered Fallon's fury. The other half booed him, their voices colliding in a storm of sound. The studio was no longer orderly. It was a courtroom in chaos. Johnson finally leaned forward, his voice calm, almost too calm against the roar. You finished? Fallon's chest heaved. His hands shook against the desk. Yeah, he spat. For now. Johnson paused, letting the silence reclaim the room piece by piece. His gaze cut through Fallon, through the cameras, through the millions watching beyond. You're right about one thing. I have been quiet, too quiet, and maybe that was my mistake. But I'll tell you the difference between us, Jimmy. When I speak, I'm not hiding. When I speak, I mean every damn word. The audience erupted again, some clapping, some jeering. The sound was deafening. Fallon's eyes darted nervously, as if searching for an ally in the sea of faces that no longer belonged to him. In that moment, The Tonight Show was no longer a comedy stage. It was a battleground of accusations and hypocrisy, each man standing trial not only before each other, but before the millions watching in judgment. And for the first time, Fallon's smile, the mask that had carried him for decades, was gone. What remained was raw, human, and furious. The studio air had grown dense, charged with something heavier than confrontation. It was memory itself clawing its way into the present. Fallon sat hunched over his desk, his tie loosened, his composure fractured. Johnson stood tall, breathing steadily, but even he seemed braced for what was coming. The clash had shifted beyond words. Now the past itself was entering the trial. A murmur swept through the audience as whispers of old controversies began to ripple like smoke. Phones buzzed in laps, headlines resurfacing in real time. Fallon's laugh, once his shield, had been used before to excuse moments that had left deep scars. Johnson's voice was firm but unhurried. Jimmy, you've mocked, you've dodged, you've hidden, but the truth is, the past doesn't stay buried. Fallon shot him a sharp glare. Don't you dare go there. Johnson tilted his head, calm yet unyielding. You wore blackface. You mocked lives you'll never understand, struggles you'll never carry. You laughed it off then, and people forgave you because you smiled, because you made it easy to forget. But forgetting doesn't erase the wound. The audience gasped. Fallon's jaw clenched, his face pale under the studio lights. He stammered, "That was years ago. I apologized. I've grown." But the murmurs in the crowd told a different story. Some nodded sympathetically, others shook their heads in disgust. The past had not vanished. It had been waiting. Fallon's voice cracked as he lashed back. "And what about you, huh? Mr. Accountability? You parade as if you're untouchable. But where were you when people demanded voices to stand with them? You stayed silent. You chose brand deals over battles. You let corporations polish your image while they squeezed the very workers you claim to care about. That's your past, Dwayne. Don't pretend it isn't." The room shifted, the energy like a jury scribbling notes on both defendants. Johnson's eyes hardened. His words came slow, deliberate. "You're right. I did stay quiet. I thought silence was safe. I thought neutrality was strength. But neutrality in the face of struggle? That's complicity. And I'll own that mistake. Can you own yours?" Fallon's lips trembled, his hands gripping the desk until his knuckles whitened. "I said I was sorry. I've tried to do better." Johnson leaned forward, lowering his voice so it cut even deeper. "Trying isn't enough when you never admit how deep the damage runs." The audience was no longer silent. They wept, re-alive with tension, some clapping Johnson's candor, others calling out Fallon's right to redemption. It was chaos, but chaos with a rhythm, the sound of a public reckoning too large to be contained.